One of the cornerstones of standard programming practice is the use of loops. And you've seen loops already. For example, the forever loop help control program flow. But one of the most important applications of loops is to step through lists of data. For example, database lists of information. It's one of the common things you do in programming. And you may have seen, for example, in programs that you use, blocks of data displayed in graphic user interfaces. But underlying any sort of data application of that type, we're working with lists of data. That data is stored in code somehow inside a program. Even if you never see it using, for example, a database like Microsoft Access or any of the other databases that have some sort of encapsulating functions that let you deal with that data, somewhere on the computer that data is stored in a format that's basically just a code containing that huge list of data. In Rebol, the format that's saved in is the block structure. That's one of the main ways it's saved in Rebol. And so you can create a list of data. In this case, in this program, we're going to create a list of users. We're going to enclose that in a block, and we're going to put a number of items in that block. That block is going to be called users. We're assigning that word to this block. You can see it's indented, and each line in that block contains another block which stores a bunch of text information about each user. There's a first name, a last name, a street address, a city and state, and a phone number. If any of those are left empty, they need to have empty quotes to save that space. So there are always 5 items in each of those. So again, we have a block of users. In this case, we have 5 blocks contained in that block, and that forms a little database for us. Paste that into Rebol so we can work with it here. So we dissect this program as we go along. I've got some users. And the way you refer to items in this block is by using the notation you've seen already, the block structure. Users 1 refers to the first item. Users 2 refers to the second item, and so on. So now it's defined in Rebol. And we're going to create a command line program here. It's not going to be a GUI. So what we're going to do to make this look pretty is we're going to have a little line function, because to print stuff out on screen, we're going to separate it easily with lines. Create a little function here called draw-line, draw-line. Assign that word to this function. Every time you see the draw-line word, it's going to do this code. What's going to happen is we're going to loop. That's another type of loop. Loop 65 times. It's a built-in function in Rebol. This gets done every time we type draw line. 65 times we're going to use the print statement, which again prints characters right next to each other. We're going to print 65 of those, and then run the function print with an empty space, so it'll give us a new line. So effectively what that does is draw a line of 25 dashes and then goes to the next line. And it's really important here. It was actually done this way in this example to show you that that's not a very effective way to draw a line, because every time we use the draw line function, it's going to do this thing where it does a loop of 65 print functions and then another print function. And although modern computers are fast, let's start that function here. You can see we draw the line and it comes out pretty quick, but it's not a very efficient way to do this. For example, say we want to do that 100 times, you'll actually see some screen flicker. I'll use the loop function again, and this time we'll just loop that draw line function. So what we're actually doing here is doing 100 loops of this draw line function, which does 65 loops of this print function in print. So we're doing 6,500 dashes, and you can see there's a little bit of screen flicker as that goes on. It's not all that fast. That was done specifically to show you how programming thought and how you actually decide to implement a function in any programming language can dramatically affect how quickly the program runs, especially if you're dealing with enormous volumes of data. That was 6,500 characters, but still you might be dealing with databases that have millions of lines, and when you're looping through a database, that can make an enormous difference. Here's a better example of how to draw a line, and we'll use this later on in other implementations. This avoids having to run that loop every single time you run the draw line function. What we do instead is create a little variable here, a variable word, that just creates an empty block. We do that by using the word copy to make sure that that's created as an empty block. That's a Rebol nuance that needs to be understood. To create an empty block, basically use the copy function and put a blank block. And then we're going to loop 65 times through this little bit of code. We're going to append to that block, the A line, this character. So we do that once. Now we've got a word that has this character appended to it 65 times. Now we're going to take that A line and redefine it again, take the existing line and trim it and convert it to a string. Convert it to a string and then trim it. So essentially what we've done is we've created a bunch of text characters. We could have just assigned that 65 text characters, but this is to just demonstrate some loops. And now anytime we print that A line, it'll print out that block of text. Instead of having to run through a function every single time we want to print that line. That saves quite a bit of processing time, and it makes it much faster to work with. For the time being, we're going to leave it the inefficient way just to make the point. Okay, next, we define a little function that will print all of the information in that user's block. And again, we're creating a function here called print all. We assign it that word, and every time that word is used, it does this block of code. Right here again, all indented. In that block of code, there's a for each loop. Again, the way the for each loop works is it lets you assign a word name to refer to each bit of data that's looped through that block. So every time this is going to loop through each of the items in that block, each of those 5 user items that we created, those blocks, and it's going to call that in each of these loops, or it's going to assign that word user to it. And so this is the code that's executed every time it loops through and goes through an item in the block. It's going to execute the draw line function, so it's going to draw a line. It's going to print this bit of code. Rejoin again, what it does is it joins together as a single text item the items that are enclosed in the block. So it's going to say user, and it's going to take the first item from that first block in the users, and it's going to take the second item. So basically the name and last name, the first name and last name. And it's going to draw another line, and it's going to print out that information. It's going to print out the address, which is the third and fourth items, the street name and the state. And then it's going to print the phone number. And it's going to do a little label here, phone, and print the actual phone number. Then it'll print a new line and do that again. So it's going to print. Again, what we're doing is printing all the items. It's going to go through each item in the user block, draw a line, label as user, print the first name, last name, draw another line, and then print the address and phone number. And do that for each of the items in the user's block. So it prints all of the items. Let's just try that once so you see it. Define that print all function. Now when we type print all, it goes through and does that. So you can see here it's printed the line, printed user, got the first one, printed address, printed the first address, printed phone, second one, then it loops through. Next time it uses the second item in that user's block, the third item, fourth item, and so on until it finishes with the last item.